Elephants are cool. People love elephants. And like many animals we know and love today, they happen to have some pretty heinous extinct relatives from millions of years ago. So today I'll be introducing you to Platybelodon, the weirdest elephant to ever exist, that we know of. Or I guess technically an elephant relative, a not true elephant. This strange shovel-mouthed creature has been through the ringer, with scientists going back and forth for nearly a century, debating on what kind of shit they got into. I'm gonna give you a nice little rundown of all of it, introducing you to some of their other strange relatives, and telling you the story of Platybelodon that we know of. Alright, so as I had mentioned, Platybelodon was an elephant relative, but not true elephant. The true elephants we know and love today belong to a larger elephant-like lineage, the Proboscideans, which fossil evidence suggests first appeared in North Africa about 60 million years ago. Platybelodon belongs to this lineage. And by the way, they're called Proboscideans because of their proboscis, that trunk. Proboscideans proboscis. One of the earliest and smallest proboscideans that we know of is called Erytherium, alive about 60 million years ago in North Africa. Very small, about 13 pounds and fed on wet vegetation. Very cute little guy. Looks more like a rat than an elephant, I know. Proboscideans got more elephanty over time, increasing in size of course, and their feet got short and broad for better weight distribution. Their skulls got fucking massive, and their necks went short while their trunks went long. They bulked up. They got stout. Their middle incisors evolved into tusks, yada yada, and now boom, elephant. The largest proboscidean to ever exist that we know of was like the most elephant you could possibly get, the straight-tusked elephant, alive pretty recently during the Pleistocene, also known as the Ice Age.
Well, why not call it the Big Chill or the Nippy Era?
They were like modern elephants on steroids, potentially weighing up to 14 tons with a height of 15 feet at the shoulder. Absolute tanks. It's possible they were the largest land mammals to ever exist, that we know of, but kind of neck and neck with one of my favorite extinct animals, Paraceratherium, which was like a rhino mixed with a giraffe, and also very large, but that is a conversation for another day. So Proboscideans spread out all over the world, with the exception of Antarctica and Australia, since they didn't have boats that we know of. They had to rely on land, i.e. land bridges and plate tectonics. So about 19 million years ago, some were able to migrate out of Africa. 3 million years later, some migrated over the land bridge to North America. And then about 13 million years later, some went south to South America. These migrations led to bursts of diversification and some strange lineages I feel like I might as well mention before we get into the main course of today. So first up, Dinotherium, alive in Africa and Eurasia from about 14 million years ago to a single million years ago. Very long time. Their name means terrible beast, and it is definitely fitting. They had these backwards facing tusks that made their fossilized skulls look absolutely heinous, and led to some really fucked up ideas about what the fuck they had going on in the 1700s. Scientists thought they were aquatic. Yeah, aquatic elephants, because the tusks seemed too heavy to possibly carry on land. So they thought, must be in the water, raking the bottom of the sea floor or lake floor with their tusks for nutrients and whatever plant material to eat. And in the 1800s, scientists built on top of this, suggesting maybe they slammed their tusks into the bank at night, hooking themselves in so they could keep their head above water and not float away. Absolutely outrageous. And you know what? I fuck with it. I feel like paleontology in the 16th and 17th century was just vibes and like having a good time. So today, in a stale turn of events, Dinotherium was not aquatic. And we know that Dinotherium's head was actually relatively light. So there's no reason why they would have to live in the water. And there is also no evidence that they lived in or around water at all. So no water elephants that we know of. Yum. But things do get a little more obscene with this next group on the list, the Gomphotheres, which look exactly like their name sounds. They hit the nail right on the head with that one. The most classic Gomphothere was Gomphotherium, alive from like 16 million to 5 million years ago. Different sources had different dates, so just gonna go with that, but they were possibly alive even earlier than that. They had two upper tusks that kind of curved downwards and two lower tusks that made a shovel shape. And you might have noticed they look like a more mild version of our main show today, Platybelodon. That's because Platybelodon was a shovel-tusked Gomphothere. So let's get into it. Platybelodon was alive during the late Miocene, about 10 to 5 million years ago, and were found in parts of Africa and Eurasia. Their skulls are bizarre, to say the least, which have led to some pretty nightmarish reconstructions since, as of right now, we don't know how the soft tissues would fit around the skull. It's kind of hard to say, but a nightmare skull, nonetheless. It was first described in 1927 by paleontologist, how do you pronounce this Russian name? Because Russia is Russia and not Russia. So maybe it's Borishak. Paleontologist A.A. Borishak in southern Russia. He noticed some traits on the fossil that were different from other shovel-tusked Gomphotheres that were already known. Like this one had shovel tusks that were more flat and upper tusks that were more short. Traits were more shovel-like than others. So, boom, Platybelodon deserved its own group. A year later, other Platybelodon fossils were found in Mongolia. And this led to some of the earliest ideas of what that shovel mouth was used for. Yeah, you guessed it, like a shovel.
Yes, science!
Slamming their lower jaw into a shallow pond, scooping up vegetation and mud, and throwing it back into their mouth. 2 years later, even more Platypelodon fossils were found in the same area, in what seemed to be some sort of death assemblage. They had the bones of at least 26 individuals, including a developing fetus, all from the same spot. Clearly some sort of tragedy millions of years ago, but an absolute gold mine for scientists today. Now they had growth patterns, generations of Platypelodon at their fingertips. They could map out what their development looked like, which was obviously sick for science. Turns out that lower jaw scoop developed over time. The fetus didn't have it. The juveniles had more of a Y-shaped lower jaw rather than a scoop. Their lower incisors were larger proportionally than the adults developed into the classic scoop. Oops. And then the adults developed into the classic scoop. There were also some differences in the position of the nasal bones between the males and females, so they had this shit figured out. This led to a kind of case closed situation for decades. Like, fuck, yeah, we figured it out. Platypelodon, check. Shovel mouth, used their mouth like a shovel. Until 1992, when paleontologist David Lambert decided to examine them from a different point of view. Rather than assuming their function based on their resemblance to a shovel, which they even have a side-by-side comparison to,
corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
Lambert wanted to look at the microwear patterns on the teeth, as you would do for other animals that don't have a mouth like a shovel, or resemblance to some sort of other man-made tool. Microwear patterns can give you a good idea on what kind of material the animal was chewing on a regular basis. And the evidence Lambert found pointed to much tougher material, which is not what you would find in the soft sediment of a lake floor. No. More like twigs and bark and things of that nature. This led to some new ideas. Maybe Platypelodon was scooping up vegetation from mud and occasionally scraped a smooth rock, but it seems much more likely that their shovel mouth had many uses, like plucking up vegetation with their trunk and rubbing it against the shovel teeth until it breaks, sawing through it, or using their lower teeth to scrape bark from trees, by using their trunk to grasp branches as a stabilizer while they swung their heads back and forth, sawing at it. All heinous visuals. Further research also noted that individuals seemed to go for tougher and tougher materials as they got older. So maybe starting off with a picky diet, soft materials as juveniles, and then going for whatever the fuck they want when they got older. Regardless, the image of this creature scraping its mouth against a tree to obtain bark is one that keeps me up at night. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you feel about it, it's a method that didn't stick around for long, because eventually they got booted. Possibly due to shifting habitat changes due to shifting climates that they couldn't keep up with. Gomphotheres as a whole stuck around for a few million years after that, until they were eventually replaced by the better adapted elephants. It's possible that early humans could have played a role in their decline, but there's no direct evidence that points to that, at least that I know of. So, the shovel mouths are now left in the fossil record. And before we move on to the questions for this week's episode, I want to give some honorable shout outs to other Platypelodon relatives that had the same kind of shit going on, but to varying degrees. Amebelodon, alive in what is now North America, possibly parts of Africa and Asia. Pteranobelodon, from Asia and North America. And Cerbelodon, also alive in what is now North America. I wish they were still alive today. Okay. Let's move on to this week's questions. What the fuck is this? Foul pest. I like that a lot. I like that. Keep sending me shit like that, please. I found it in my bathroom and it's very, very fast and small and grayish colored. I live in the Pacific Northwest if that's anything. Thank you. That is definitely some sort of silverfish, which like to go into houses because they like to bore into wood and shit. They're not toxic and they don't pose any threat to your health. Just take it outside to a log or some sort of wood. All right, could I actually beat a cheetah in a fist fight? Time sensitive question. So here's the deal. When I worked with cheetahs, I learned very quickly that captive cheetahs are much more of a threat than wild cheetahs. Cheetahs evolved to run fast, which also means they evolved to run away. Their defense against any predator is to run away. That is what their instincts tell them to do. The only instances of humans being seriously harmed by cheetahs have happened in captivity, with captive cheetahs, because they're used to humans. Wild cheetahs will just run away. Captive cheetahs are more used to humans, and at some point their wild instinct can just come out. I know someone who was mauled by captive cheetahs, and it is absolutely baffling to me that people keep them as pets for that reason. So, you could probably beat a wild cheetah in a fist fight, but captive cheetah wouldn't take your chances. If you have a weird animal you want identified or a question you want answered, let me know in the comments and I might feature it in the next video. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Check out my Patreon for a Discord server and live streams. And for now, stay curious. The world has a lot for us to learn. See ya!